it's also not a war, because wars are between two armies, and there are no two armies here. There's one well-equipped army, one of the strongest armies in the world, vis-a-vis an organization with very little means, which did a terrible crime on the 7th of October, and Israel committed ever since then 1,000 7th of October in Gaza and continues to do so. So the 7th of October does not justify anything that followed it.
What about...
This is not self-defense. This is a genocide.
Now, residents of Gaza City say dozens of Israeli tanks and military vehicles have pushed into a major residential district on the second day of Israel's ground offensive in the area. The Times reports Keir Starmer will this weekend formally recognise Palestinian statehood after President Trump has left the UK. But will this actually make any material difference to the situation in Gaza? Let's speak to Jane Kinnamont, Chief Executive at United Nations Association UK. It's a charity that designs campaigns dedicated to promoting human rights, peace and security and United Nations reform. Jane is also a former Chatham House Middle East expert. Welcome to Times at 1, Jane. Can you give us an idea of the current situation and what it's like on the ground in Gaza?
Thank you, Joe. I've just been speaking to a humanitarian worker that recently returned from Gaza about the absolute horror that is going on the ground there. And I think everyone's able to see that now from many sources. People have lost their homes, they've been displaced many times. They are facing what's been recognised as a famine. And a United Nations Independent Commission of Inquiry this week concluded that it constitutes genocide, something that Palestinians have been saying for a very long time. So people there are feeling hopeless, displaced, wondering where the rest of the world is and how this could happen in the 21st century.
Well, how has Israel, in your mind, responded to the international condemnation? Because they are saying that the report is distorted by the United Nations. They actually contradict the idea that a genocide is underway and that they are going to still pursue that goal, as they would see it, of ridding the Gaza Strip of Hamas.
Certainly, and I think it's important also to note that there has been growing opposition inside Israel to continuing the war. There have been Israeli voices, from the novelist David Grossman to NGOs like B'Tselem and Physicians for Human Rights, who have said that they believe that it is a genocide, as agonising as that is for them to contemplate. But certainly the Israeli government is pushing back very strongly against those claims. At the same time, we do see, for example, the Israeli finance minister spoke yesterday at a conference about urban development, where he said, we've nearly completed the demolition of Gaza and there will now be a building which will constitute a real estate bonanza for the Americans. So, one of the things that has been included in this study about whether it is a genocide has been the statements that have come out from at least some in the Israeli government, who have not said only we're trying to get the hostages back and trying to get rid of Hamas, but the Palestinians should leave. We will bury the idea of a Palestinian state.
Yes. Well, on that issue of a Palestinian state, as we've been discussing on the programme, there is going to be an announcement and the UK government will recognise Palestine as a state. What material difference will that make to Palestinians in Gaza?
So this is a very significant political step, but by itself, of course, it won't change the day-to-day reality on the ground. It is, however, part of a wider plan that has been led by European countries working together with Arab states and convening through the United Nations to try to put forward a credible alternative that takes into account the security of both Israelis and Palestinians. So I'd really urge people to go and look up the New York Declaration from July, which represents a growing multilateral consensus that there needs to be a ceasefire. It brought all the Arab states together for the first time, saying that Hamas should hand its weapons over to the Palestinian Authority and should leave government, that there needs to be a political transition in Palestinian government, but at the same time underscoring that Palestinians have the right to remain on their land and to have their state.
Yes.
And the idea is to try to revive the idea of there being two states for two peoples. But yes, there is a chance that this will be declared and that things could even get worse on the ground in Gaza. We're seeing the diplomacy and the military actions going in two very, very different directions.
Jane Kinnamont, Chief Executive at the United Nations Association UK. Thank you very much for joining us at the Times at 1. Well, let's continue this discussion about Israel's ground offensive in Gaza City, which, as I've said, has been widely condemned by the international community. Jonathan Conricus, a former IDF spokesperson, told Times Radio Breakfast the Western world just doesn't understand the challenges Israel faces in the Middle East.
Western governments, UK included, or perhaps led by the US, have strayed from understanding the reality that we in Israel face. We are at the forefront of fighting against radical Islam. We are facing threats and dangers that may materialize, I hope they won't, but may materialize in the West as well. The difference is that we're at the forefront of it, and it is our people, Israelis, that face the consequences of radical Islam on our borders. Our posture towards what we're facing is so different from yours because we understand the reality of it.
Gideon Levy, columnist at Haaretz, an Israeli daily newspaper, joins me now. Gideon Levy, can you respond to what you've just heard, that Israel is at the forefront of fighting radical Islam, and we just can't understand that? We're not experiencing that.
Yeah, poor you and poor Israelis. Israel is committing a genocide and Israel is the victim, and you don't understand it. I mean, it's really ridiculous even to try to react to such low propaganda. I mean, what does this has to do? What has to do the fighting against Islam or radical Islam to do with 1,000 killed babies? What does it has to do with tens of thousands of children which are killed, injured, and destruction, making Gaza an unlivable place? What does this has to do, for God's sake? I mean,
well, Gideon,
really,
I suppose the other thing that we hear from Israeli government representatives, from the Israeli Defence Forces, is that the massacre on the 7th of October was a declaration of war. This is a war. This is what happens in wars. And this isn't a case of Israel being allowed or to leave the situation as is without destroying Hamas as a terrorist organisation.
In other words, after the 7th of October, Israel has the right to do whatever it wants. No, I cannot accept it. By the way, it's also not a war, because wars are between two armies, and there are no two armies here. There is one well-equipped army, one of the strongest armies in the world, vis-a-vis an organization with very little means, which did a terrible crime on the 7th of October, and Israel committed ever since then 1,007th of October in Gaza and continues to do so. So the 7th of October does not justify anything that followed it.
What about...
This is not self-defense. This is a genocide. And you can't call it in any other way but genocide. And genocide cannot be justified by anything.
What about the widespread protests within Israel itself? I mean, there is a contract, a social contract between Israel and its people, because people, all of them, spend some time in the army. And although there have been these widespread protests against the Israeli government, particularly against Benjamin Netanyahu, they're still there. The government is still there. The Israeli Defence Force is still fighting. Is there going to be enough momentum to make any noticeable difference to what Netanyahu is doing?
I doubt it, unless we'll get to elections. In elections, he might be replaced, but election will not be before 2026. The protest is very impressive, but let's remember the protest is against Netanyahu and calls for the release of the hostages, which is obviously a very, very, very important goal. but it has nothing to do with the genocide in Gaza. There is no protest against the genocide in Gaza. And this must be remembered. Now Netanyahu heads a government which has a very clear majority in the parliament. And as long as this majority, very solid majority, will continue to support him, he will be prime minister until the next elections. The demonstrations will not be able to change it.
What do you say about the recognition of Palestinian statehood? Keir Starmer is due to make an announcement in the next few days after Donald Trump has left the UK. How important do you think that is? I mean, is it going to make any difference?
Unfortunately not, and I really mean it that it is unfortunate, but the whole world can recognize the state of Palestine. As long as one state doesn't recognize it, namely Israel, it has no meaning. On the contrary, it might also be destructive. Recognizing Palestine right now is a nice lip service that the EU and the UK adopted now to show that they are doing something. It doesn't change anything on the ground. It will not stop the war, and it will not promote a Palestinian state, unfortunately so, because as long as Israel puts a veto on it, and it is totally backed by the United States, it just has no chance.
In terms of the United States being the one country and Donald Trump being the one politician that could perhaps persuade or deter Benjamin Netanyahu from his war aims as he would see it, do you think that is likely to happen?
Can you foresee what Donald Trump will say in 5 minutes? I mean, Donald Trump can put an end to it in one phone call.
But on that, there'll be people who say, well, Hamas could too. They could release the hostages. Qatar could put pressure on Hamas to do so. And that would also help sort of moves towards peace, to the end of this war. It would take away the reasoning of Benjamin Netanyahu if hostages were released.
You really believe that Netanyahu cares about the hostages? Don't make me laugh. If the hostages will be released, Netanyahu will not stop the war because his goals are much, much, much broader than the 20 hostages, and he declares so. He says he wants to destroy Hamas. In other words, he wants to destroy the whole Gaza Strip because for me, there are no innocent people in Gaza, and you really believe that releasing the hostages will stop it? It's ridiculous. Netanyahu has very clear goals here, namely an ethnic cleansing and a genocide in Gaza, and 20 hostages are not his first priority. We saw it until now.
Yes.
Why does he refuse to hold the deal?
Well, as you know, the Israeli government refutes any accusations or claims of genocide. But again, Hamas isn't an organisation that is helping Palestinians themselves. And the destruction of Hamas could benefit Palestinians.
Absolutely, absolutely. The only problem is that it is impossible. You cannot destroy Hamas. As simple as this. You can destroy its military power for a short while. You cannot destroy Hamas, especially when there is also no alternative. Who is going to run Gaza exactly?